Dobroveče, gledate kratak razgovor sa gospodinom METJU Palmerom, zamjenikom pomoćnika državnog sekretara za Evropu i Aziju. Good evening and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on your show today. I'm grateful for it.
This is your first visit to Montenegro after 3 decades, actually, of rule and domination of Democratic Party of Socialists, which has moved now to the opposition benches. Since then, we can often hear from them that the new government has deviated from the planned foreign political course. Do you recognize this government as a sincere partner, or are there things that concern you?
You know, I had good meetings yesterday and today. Saw the president, saw the prime minister, members of his government. This government says, as a matter of policy, that they are committed to Montenegro's EU future, that they are committed to being good NATO partners. The partnership that we have with this government to date has been quite good, quite constructive. We've seen some things, some steps this government has taken that I think should be recognized as positive steps, including removing one of their own ministers who engaged in genocide denial and adopting a declaration that marked, I think, appropriately and respectfully the anniversary of the genocide in Srebrenica. President, Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister will travel to Srebrenica for the commemoration. I think that's an important message to Montenegro's neighbors. That said, there's still a lot of work to do. And as partners, as allies, we will work with the President, we will work with the government to advance our shared goals and objectives, including reforms that will move Montenegro closer towards membership in the European Union, and progress on combating corruption, fighting organized crime, and promoting media freedom. So there has been some positive movement. We welcome the commitments of this government to maintain the Western orientation and the European path, and we look forward to working with the President and the Prime Minister and his government in advance of our shared objectives.
10 months have passed since the August elections, and just recently, 200 days of the new government. You have had a series of meetings from Prime Minister Zdravko Krivokapić to President of State Milo Đukanović, who is still the leader of the opposition, DPS. How do you see cohabitation working in Montenegro? How do you perceive the results of the new government? What is particularly to be praised, and what possibly should be criticized?
Sure. Cohabitation is difficult. It's difficult in the United States, it's difficult in France, it's difficult in Montenegro. The president has certain responsibilities, obligations, authorities established by the Constitution, and there are areas in which the president and the prime minister, the president and the government are going to need to work together to advance the interests of Montenegro. I think we saw that clearly in the case of the removal of the Minister Leposavić, which involved cooperation between and amongst elements of the ruling coalition, the government, and the opposition DPS. And that's a demonstration of the ability of the opposition and the ruling parties to find common ground when necessary. Certainly looking forward, there are going to be areas where certain key reforms will need to be adopted, not just by the ruling coalition, but will need to be adopted with support from opposition members of parliament. And that's part of the process of negotiating agreements, finding common ground, prioritizing the interests of the state, and moving this country forward on its European path, which is the shared interest of the opposition, the government, the United States, and our European partners.
Montenegrin officials have openly accused the government in Belgrade, headed by President Vučić, of directly interfering in internal affairs of Montenegro through the Democratic Front, which is a key constituent of the new government, which supports ex-minister Leposevic, who you mentioned. Do you recognize that influence? To which extent? And are you concerned about this? Can there be any suggestions to the official Belgrade to that regard?
Yeah. You know, we are certainly cognizant of the involvement of third parties, outside actors in the Montenegrin political scene, including in particular in the areas of disinformation in cyberspace, efforts to unduly influence political developments in this country. And I think it's important that the Montenegrin public have confidence that policy in this country is being led by elected representatives chosen by them to advance their interests. So this is an area where I think we need to pay careful attention. We are working with our Montenegrin partners to help strengthen the capacity to identify this kind of activity, particularly in cyberspace, and take appropriate action to guard against it. But this is not a challenge limited to Montenegro. I think around the world we have seen outside actors, some of them governments, some of them non-government actors, working to engage often on a deniable or covert basis to influence political developments. We've certainly, in the United States, confronted this same shared challenge, and Russia has been behind many of the most serious efforts.
But talking about this particular issue, relations with Belgrade, to what extent can the executive order of President Biden for imposing the sanctions on organizations and individuals who disrupt peace and stability be applicable in this situation?
I think the executive order really speaks for itself in terms of the scope of the authorities. The modernized, updated executive order highlights corruption, threats to the rule of law, which I think is a broad-based area, and human rights abuses as issues that for which the United States would be authorized to take action, including sanctions. The sanctions decisions are made as part of a disciplined process. It's something that we consider very carefully from a policy perspective and then engage in a very thorough, very careful legal review before making any determinations or any decisions. And I'm not now in a position to preview any sanctions decisions, but the authorities in the sanctions, the updated, modernized Balkan sanctions regime, I think offer important tools for the United States in advancing our vision of a region that is stable, prosperous, and peaceful.
The influences of the world, great powers collide in the Western Balkans. That's not news, and it's often heard that the weakening of the presence of the West opens up space from various influences, from Russia, from China. The government, precisely the Minister of Economic Development, Jakov Milatovic, recently announced that Montenegro is just a few weeks away from the agreement with European and American banks on restructuring or refinancing almost 1 billion euros debt to China. Can this statement be interpreted as announcement of your intensified presence here in the region?
The United States does not negotiate on behalf of American banks for refinancing
I understand, but
debt,
still.
country debt. I would look at that as a demonstration of commitment on the part of this government to fiscal responsibility and to limiting the ability of outside actors, in this case China in particular, from making mischief. And I think that there was reason to be concerned about the contract that Montenegro signed with China, the debt obligations that it entailed, and the consequences for this country if it wasn't able to service the debt. So I think it's a good thing that these arrangements have been put in place, and I think it will create a little bit of space and limit the leverage that the People's Republic of China might otherwise have had over policymaking in Montenegro. Going forward, I would hope that not only Montenegro, but all of the countries of the Western Balkans would be clear-eyed about any agreements that they reached with China, and certainly any contracts that they might sign for infrastructure development, as we've seen China around the world employ this kind of debt trap diplomacy to get countries on the hook for obligations that they're not in a position to finance, and then use that as leverage to extract political concessions. And that's a tactic that we have seen the Chinese employ in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and increasingly in the European space as well.
Today, in local newspapers, we read the statement of Hungarian foreign minister regarding Harbor Bar. Are you interested in the status of Harbor Bar regarding its important geostrategic position?
Absolutely. The port of Bar is an important strategic asset for Montenegro. And as the government considers the best way to develop the port and the infrastructure around the port, we would hope and expect that they would be clear-eyed and careful and make any decisions about partners in that process with an eye towards the long future and not just to the upfront sticker price of any proposals.
Criticizers of the official US policy, including the Democratic Front, which I just mentioned, which is, I repeat, the strongest constituent of the new government, claim that you are already omnipresent here in Montenegro, that nothing happens without your consent, and that the new government is a puppet in your hands. Do you, as they accuse, by propagating the thesis on Russian and Chinese illegitimate influence, actually make space to turn these unstable transition states into your protectorates for a longer time? That's their thesis. What's your comment on that?
That's nonsense. We're partners for Montenegro. We're more than partners. We're allies. And there are no relationships that we have that are closer, deeper, stronger, more sacred than the relationships that we have with our allies. We have a vision for Montenegro's future. It is a European vision. It is Montenegro as a strong partner in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and Montenegro moving forward and securing membership in the European Union, which is an enormously important global partner for the United States. The great thing here is that this is the vision that the Montenegrin public has for its own future. This is the vision that Montenegro has adopted as its strategy, as its vision for the direction in which it wants to go. So our goals, Montenegro's goals, there's a great degree of overlap, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to help this country, our ally, our partner, move in that direction.
There are some things that are not overlapping. The Montenegrin government is now considering a model for ending the agreement that provides immunity to US citizens from the International Criminal Court, which is a prerequisite for progress in the negotiations with the EU. Would such an ending create problems in cooperations with the USA? How do we overcome this problem?
You know, we support unconditionally Montenegro's EU path. This is a complex issue. It's a difficult issue. It's one that we're going to have to work through, and we will work with the Montenegrin government, with the presidency, with the government, as allies and partners to navigate a path forward, and I'm confident we can do this.
Thank you very much for
Thank you
for this conversation.
Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
All
Thank
right,
you.
take care.